The pounding on the door came before the sun had even touched the sky. Elena Marsh sat up in bed, her heart racing, as she heard Vivian's voice screaming from the hallway outside her room. "Get up, Elena! Get up right now!" Elena rushed to the door and pulled it open. Vivian stood there, still in her silk nightgown, her golden hair a wild mess around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide, with something that looked like panic, but Elena had learned long ago that Vivian's panic was rarely real. It was almost always a performance meant to get exactly what she wanted. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" Elena asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning cold. "The invitation," Vivian said, her voice sharp and accusing. "The invitation to the mating ball. It came for you. For you, Elena. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any idea what you are about to walk into?" Elena blinked, still half asleep. "I don't understand. What invitation?" Vivian shoved a thick cream-colored envelope into her hands. The wax seal on the back showed a crescent moon, wrapped in thorns, the mark of the Crimson Moon Pack, the most powerful wolf pack in the entire Northern Territory. Elena's fingers trembled as she broke the seal and read the letter inside. "By order of Alpha King Draven Cole, ruler of the Crimson Moon Pack, you are cordially invited to attend the mating ball, held 3 nights from now at Ashgate Hall. Attendance is required. Failure to appear will be seen as an insult to the crown." Elena read the words twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of them. She was nobody. She worked in the kitchens of Ashwood Packhouse, cleaning pots and scrubbing floors for a family that barely acknowledged her existence. She was not a daughter of status. She was not beautiful in the way the ballrooms expected. She was, by every measure that mattered in wolf society, invisible. "There must be some mistake," Elena whispered. "There's no mistake," Vivian snapped, snatching the letter back from her hands. "I checked the guest list myself. I asked our father's assistant this morning before the sun even rose. Your name is written there in the official records. Elena Marsh. Not mine. Yours." Elena watched her stepsister's face carefully. Vivian was beautiful in the way that magazines and paintings tried to capture and never quite managed. She had spent her entire life preparing for a moment exactly like this one. She had been groomed since childhood to attend balls, to charm alphas, to marry into power. And now, through some strange twist of fate, the invitation had landed in the hands of the one person in the house who had never wanted any part of that world. "I don't want to go," Elena said honestly. "You know I don't care about any of this. Take it. Tell them there was an error. Tell them anything you like." For a moment, something flickered across Vivian's face, something that looked almost like relief. Then it vanished, replaced by a look Elena recognized all too well, the look Vivian wore right before she did something cruel and called it kindness. "That's very generous of you," Vivian said slowly. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain," Elena said. "I have never wanted to be part of the mating balls or the pack politics. That has always been your world, not mine." Vivian's smile returned, sweet and practiced. Then it settled. "I will simply attend in your place. No one outside our household needs to know the difference." The invitation says Elena Marsh, but who is to say which Marsh daughter shows up at the door? Father can smooth over any confusion with the pack elders. This is perfect, actually. This is exactly how it should be. Elena felt a strange unease settle into her stomach, though she could not name why. She told herself it did not matter. She had never wanted the ball, never wanted the attention of an alpha king, never wanted the burden of being chosen or rejected in front of an entire court of wolves who would judge her worth in a single glance. Let Vivian have it. Vivian wanted it more than anyone Elena had ever known. "Fine," Elena said. "Take my place. I don't care." Vivian's eyes gleamed with something victorious, something that made Elena's unease deepen even further. But before she could ask what that look meant, Vivian had already turned and swept back down the hallway, calling out orders to the household staff about dresses and hair and jewelry, as though the matter had been decided hours ago, and Elena's agreement had been nothing more than a formality. Elena closed her door and sat back down on her bed, staring at the empty space where the envelope had been. She told herself the strange feeling in her chest was nothing. She told herself that whatever Vivian was planning, it had nothing to do with her anymore. She had given up her place willingly. There was no reason to feel as though she had just made a mistake she would spend the rest of her life regretting. Outside her window, the pale morning light stretched over the hills that surrounded Ashwood Packhouse. Somewhere far beyond those hills, In a territory Elena had never once visited, stood the palace of the Crimson Moon Pack, where Alpha King Draven Cole ruled with a reputation that traveled faster than wind through the trees. People said his wolf had never once accepted a mate, and that the entire purpose of this ball was for him to finally choose one. People said many things about Draven Cole, and Elena had always assumed she would never know which of them were true. She did not know, not yet, how close she was about to come to finding out. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that Elena mostly avoided. She kept to the kitchens, kept to the gardens, kept as far from the noise and excitement building throughout the house as she possibly could. Seamstresses arrived to fit Vivian for gowns. Hairstylists arrived to test different styles. Vivian floated through the halls like a queen already crowned, humming songs Elena did not recognize, practicing curtsies in front of every mirror she passed. On the morning of the ball, Elena woke to find her bedroom door locked from the outside. She tried the handle 3 times before she understood what had happened. She pounded on the wood, calling out for someone, anyone, to come and let her out. No one answered. The house had gone strangely quiet, as though every servant and every family member had been given clear instructions to stay away from her door.
"Vivian!"
Elena shouted, her voice cracking with a fear she did not fully understand yet. "Vivian, what is this? Let me out." Silence answered her, thick and deliberate. She searched her room for another way out, but the window was too high above the garden below, and the door was solid oak, the kind that had guarded this house for generations. She sat on the floor with her back against the door and tried to think clearly. Vivian had asked her to give up her place at the ball. Elena had agreed. There was no reason for her to be locked inside her own room, unless Vivian was afraid of something. Afraid that Elena might change her mind. Afraid that Elena might show up at Ashgate Hall and reveal the truth to everyone watching. But why would that matter, if Elena had already agreed to stay behind? Unless there was something more to this ball than a simple invitation. Unless Vivian was planning something bigger than borrowing her stepsister's name for one night. Elena pressed her palms flat against the cool wood floor and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She thought about the letter, the crescent moon seal, the words, "Attendance is required." She thought about the way Vivian's eyes had gleamed with victory the moment Elena gave up her place. She thought about every story she had ever heard about Alpha King Draven Cole and his legendary sense of smell, his ability to detect a lie before it was even fully spoken. If Vivian intended to walk into that ballroom wearing Elena's name like a borrowed coat, she would be standing in front of a man whose entire reputation rested on sensing the truth beneath every disguise. Elena did not know why that thought made her chest tighten with something that was not quite fear and not quite hope. She only knew that something was about to happen tonight that would change more than just her stepsister's future. She could feel it settling over the house like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to break. Hours passed. The light outside her window shifted from morning gold to the pale white of midday, then slowly toward the deep orange of late afternoon. Elena tried the door again and again, each time met with the same unmovable silence. She called out for Grace, the one servant in the household who had always shown her kindness, but even Grace did not answer. It was not until the sky had turned a deep and heavy blue, the kind that comes right before true darkness falls, that Elena finally heard footsteps outside her door. She scrambled to her feet, pressing her ear against the wood. "Elena?" It was Grace's voice, hushed and hurried. "Elena, are you there?" "Grace, please, open the door. Vivian locked me in hours ago." There was a pause, then the soft scrape of a key turning in the lock. The door swung open, to reveal Grace standing in the hallway, her face pale and worried, glancing over her shoulder, as though afraid of being seen. "I couldn't come sooner," Grace whispered. "Vivian gave strict orders that no one was to go near this room until the ball had already started. She said it was for your own good, that you needed rest after your agreement to stay behind." Elena stepped out into the hallway, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor for so many hours. "How long has the ball already been going?" Grace hesitated, and that hesitation told Elena everything she needed to know before the words even left her mouth. "Nearly 2 hours," Grace said quietly. "Elena, I don't know what Vivian is planning, but something about tonight feels wrong. She left in your name. She wore a dress no one had seen before, something she must have had made in secret, and she took the family carriage without telling anyone which route she was taking." Elena felt the strange unease from 3 days ago return in full force. no longer distant and vague, but sharp and immediate, pressing against her ribs like a warning she could no longer ignore. "I need to get to Ashgate Hall," Elena said. Grace's eyes widened. "Elena, the ball is for chosen guests only. If you show up uninvited, especially wearing your own face while your name has already been announced inside, there could be serious trouble. Alpha King Draven does not tolerate deception in his court." "I know," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but something tells me the deception is already inside that hall, whether I go or not, and if I don't go, I may never understand exactly what my sister has done, or what it will cost either of us, once the truth comes out." Grace studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though she too could feel the weight of what was coming. "Then let me help you get ready," Grace said. "If you are going to walk into that ballroom, you should walk in looking like yourself, not like someone trying to hide." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first one she had managed in hours. "Thank you, Grace. I don't know what I would do without you in this house." As Grace hurried to find a simple dress and brush the tangles from Elena's hair, Elena stood in front of the mirror and studied her own reflection. She did not see a girl dressed for glamour or attention. She saw someone tired, someone uncertain, someone who had spent her whole life staying quietly out of the way of a family that never valued her presence. But she also saw something else, something small and steady, burning behind her eyes. A feeling that tonight, for the first time in years, she was finally about to matter. Outside, the carriage that Grace had arranged waited in the drive, the horses restless in the cooling evening air. Elena climbed inside, her heart pounding with every turn of the wheels, carrying her closer to Ashgate Hall, closer to the ballroom where her sister wore her name like a mask, and closer to a man whose senses, according to every story she had ever heard, could not be fooled by masks at all. She did not know what she would find when she arrived. She only knew that whatever waited for her inside those grand doors, there was no turning back now. Vivian stood in front of the tall mirror in her secret room above the stables, the one place in Ashwood Packhouse no one ever thought to check. She turned slowly, admiring the deep red gown that clung to her figure like something poured rather than sewn. She had commissioned the dress weeks ago, long before the invitation had ever arrived, certain that her moment would come eventually. She simply had not expected it to arrive wearing her stepsister's name instead of her own. That detail had annoyed her at first. Now, standing in front of the mirror with her golden hair pinned into elegant waves, she saw it as nothing more than a small obstacle, easily removed. Elena had never wanted this life. Vivian had wanted it since she was old enough to understand what power looked like. It made perfect sense in her mind that she should be the one to walk through the doors of Ashgate Hall tonight, regardless of whose name appeared on the guest list. She had already taken care of the details. Elena's identification papers, carefully copied and altered. Elena's exact shade of perfume, purchased from the same shop Elena always visited, though Vivian had never once cared to notice what her stepsister wore until it became useful to her. She had studied Elena's mannerisms for days, the way she tilted her head when greeting someone, the quiet way she spoke when nervous. Vivian was confident she could perform the role of Elena Marsh convincingly enough to satisfy anyone who asked questions. She had not, however, considered what it might mean to stand in front of a man whose wolf could sense truth the way ordinary people sensed sunlight on their skin. The carriage ride to Ashgate Hall took nearly an hour, winding through forested roads that grew darker and more silent the closer they came to Crimson Moon territory. Vivian pressed her gloved hands together in her lap, rehearsing the story she had prepared. She was Elena Marsh, humble daughter of the Ashwood Pack, grateful and honored to receive such an invitation. She would speak softly, the way Elena always did. She would avoid drawing too much attention to herself early in the evening, allowing Alpha King Draven to approach her in his own time, the way alphas so often preferred. When the carriage finally rolled to a stop in front of Ashgate Hall, Vivian's breath caught in her throat despite every ounce of confidence she had built over the past 3 days. The building rose up out of the darkness like something carved from moonlight itself, tall windows glowing gold from within, music drifting faintly through the cool night air. A footman opened her carriage door and offered his hand. Vivian took it, stepping down onto the stone path with practiced grace, lifting her chin exactly the way she had rehearsed in front of her mirror a dozen times that afternoon. "Miss Marsh," the footman said, checking his list. "Welcome to Ashgate Hall." Vivian smiled, the sound of her own false name settling strangely in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, careful to keep her voice gentle, the way Elena's always was. Inside, the ballroom stretched wider than anything Vivian had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. Guests in gowns and formal suits moved in elegant clusters across the polished marble floor, their laughter mixing with the sound of a string orchestra playing somewhere near the back of the hall. Vivian felt a thrill rush through her chest, despite her nerves. This was the world she had always believed she belonged to. She moved carefully through the crowd, accepting a glass of pale gold wine from a passing server, keeping her eyes low the way she imagined Elena would. She recognized a few faces from other pack gatherings, minor nobles and distant cousins of families she barely tolerated, but none of them looked at her twice. No one here knew Elena Marsh well enough to notice the difference. It was nearly an hour into the evening when the orchestra fell silent and a hush spread across the room. Every guest turned toward the grand staircase at the far end of the hall, where a tall figure had appeared at the top of the steps. Vivian's breath caught the moment she saw him. Alpha King Draven Cole was exactly as the stories described, and somehow still more striking than she had imagined. He wore a simple black formal coat, unadorned by the jewels and medals so many lesser alphas relied upon to display their status. He did not need them. Everything about the way he stood, the way he moved down the staircase with slow, deliberate steps, spoke of a power that required no decoration. His dark hair was cut close, his jaw sharp, his eyes a striking amber that seemed to catch and hold the chandelier light as he descended into the room. The murmurs across the ballroom quieted into near silence as he reached the ground floor and began moving through the crowd, pausing occasionally to greet a guest or exchange a brief word with a visiting noble. Vivian's heart pounded as she realized, with a mixture of excitement and dread, that he was making his way steadily toward her side of the room. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to remember every detail of the performance she had rehearsed. Soft voice, gentle eyes, the slight tilt of the head Elena always used when speaking to someone she respected. "Miss Marsh," Draven said, stopping in front of her. His voice was low, controlled, carrying an authority that made the hair on Vivian's arms rise despite herself. "I understand you traveled some distance to be here tonight." "Yes, my king," Vivian said, dipping into a careful curtsy. "It is an honor to attend." Draven studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes narrowing slightly, though his expression remained polite and unreadable. Vivian felt a flicker of unease under that gaze, as though he were searching for something beneath the surface of her words. "The honor is Ashgate Hall's, to host a guest of your reputation," he said finally, though something in his tone suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "Tell me, Miss Marsh, what is it you hope to find here tonight?" The question caught Vivian off guard. She had prepared answers for compliments, for polite conversation about the weather or the music, but not for a question that seemed to probe directly at her intentions. "I hope only to honor my family's name," she said carefully, "and to see what the evening brings." Draven's eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than felt comfortable. Vivian forced herself not to look away, remembering that Elena, despite her quiet nature, had never been the kind of person to flinch from direct attention. "An interesting answer," Draven said at last. He leaned in slightly, and for a heartbeat, Vivian was certain he was about to say something else, something that would expose the careful lie she had built over the past 3 days. Instead, he simply inclined his head. "Enjoy the evening, Miss Marsh. I hope Ashgate Hall lives up to whatever you were hoping to find." He turned and moved further into the crowd, greeting other guests, his broad shoulders disappearing into the sea of silk and jewels. Vivian released a breath she had not realized she was holding, pressing a gloved hand against her chest as her pulse slowly steadied. She told herself the strange look in his eyes had meant nothing. Alphas were known to be intense by nature, especially one as powerful as Draven Cole. There was no reason to believe he suspected anything beyond ordinary nervousness in a new guest. And yet, as the evening wore on, Vivian noticed him glancing toward her more than once from across the room, his expression thoughtful, almost troubled, as though he were turning over a puzzle he could not quite solve. Each time their eyes met, a small chill ran down her spine, quickly buried beneath another practiced smile. She danced with 2 lesser nobles who approached her throughout the evening, careful to keep her voice soft, her laughter measured, her movements graceful but restrained. She avoided the refreshment table, where Elena's favorite foods were displayed, worried that reaching for the wrong dish might reveal something she could not explain. She kept her gloves on the entire night, remembering too late that Elena often removed hers while dancing, and hoping no one would notice the difference. Near midnight, as the orchestra shifted into a slower, more formal piece, Draven appeared at her side once again, this time extending his hand. "Would you honor me with this dance, Miss Marsh?" Vivian's heart lurched, but she placed her gloved hand in his without hesitation, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor, as the other guests parted respectfully around them. His hand settled at her waist, firm and warm, and for a moment, Vivian allowed herself to believe that everything was going exactly according to plan. Then Draven leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You smell different tonight, Miss Marsh," he said quietly. "I wonder why that might be." Vivian's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Perhaps it is simply the excitement of the evening, my king." Draven's amber eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her stomach twist into knots. "Perhaps," he said softly, though the word carried a weight that told her he did not fully believe his own suggestion. The dance continued, the music swelling gently around them, but Vivian felt the ground beneath her, growing less certain with every step. Whatever Draven Cole sensed beneath the surface of her borrowed name and stolen perfume, it was clear that his instincts were already beginning to whisper the truth he had not yet found the words to name. Far from the glittering lights of Ashgate Hall, in a carriage still winding its way through the dark forest roads, Elena Marsh sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the trees blur past the window, unaware that at that very moment, inside a ballroom she had never once set foot in, an Alpha King's instincts were already beginning to sense that something about the woman standing before him did not add up. The carriage jolted hard over a root in the road, throwing Elena forward against the seat. She gripped the edge of the window frame and forced herself to breathe slowly, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Grace had given the driver clear instructions to take the fastest route to Ashgate Hall, but the forest road was narrow and winding, and every minute felt like an hour. "How much longer?" Elena called up to the driver, a young man named Oliver, who worked in the Ashwood stables, and had agreed, somewhat nervously, to help Grace with this unusual errand. "Not long now, miss," Oliver called back. "Perhaps 20 minutes, if the road stays clear." 20 minutes. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine what was happening inside that ballroom at this exact moment. Vivian, wearing her name like a stolen coat, standing in front of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territory, pretending to be someone she had never once tried to understand. Elena did not know why the thought of Draven Cole made her chest tighten in a way she could not quite explain. She had never met the man. She knew him only through rumor and story, the kind of tales that traveled between kitchens and stable yards, growing more exaggerated with every retelling. Some said he had not smiled once in the 5 years since his father's death placed the crown on his head. Others said his wolf had rejected every potential mate brought before him, refusing to bond with anyone whose scent did not feel entirely true. If that last rumor held any truth at all, then Vivian's plan was built on a foundation far more fragile than she understood. The carriage rounded a bend, and suddenly the trees opened up to reveal the valley below, and there, rising against the night sky like something out of an old story, stood Ashgate Hall. Golden light spilled from every window, and even from this distance, Elena could hear the faint strains of music carried on the wind. Her heart began to pound harder with every passing second. "Oliver," she said, leaning toward the front of the carriage, "when we arrive, I need you to wait nearby. I don't know how long I'll be, or what will happen once I'm inside." "Understood, miss," Oliver said. "Whatever you need." The carriage rolled down the last stretch of road and came to a stop at the edge of a long line of other carriages parked along the drive. Elena stepped out into the cool night air, smoothing the simple pale blue dress Grace had helped her into hours earlier. It was nothing compared to the gowns she imagined the other guests would be wearing, but there had been no time for anything more elaborate, and Elena found, standing there beneath the glowing windows of Ashgate Hall, that she did not particularly care. She approached the main entrance, where 2 guards in formal Crimson Moon uniforms stood watch beside the grand doors. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward as she approached. "Invitation, miss?" Elena's stomach dropped. She had no invitation. Vivian had taken the only copy with her hours ago, tucked safely inside whatever bag she had carried into the ball. "I don't have it with me," Elena admitted, "but my name is on the guest list, Elena Marsh." The guard glanced down at a folded paper in his hand, running his finger along a list of names. "Elena Marsh already arrived several hours ago, miss. She is currently inside the ballroom." Elena's breath caught, hearing it confirmed so plainly, spoken by a stranger with no reason to lie, made the entire situation feel suddenly and terribly real. Vivian truly was inside, right now, standing in front of an alpha king, wearing a name that did not belong to her. "That's impossible," Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the panic rising in her chest. "I am Elena Marsh. Whoever entered using that name is not who she claims to be." The second guard, younger and clearly less patient than his companion, folded his arms across his chest. "That's a serious accusation, miss. We can't simply let anyone claiming to be someone else walk into a royal event." "Please," Elena said, hearing the desperation creeping into her own voice. "I understand how this sounds, but someone is inside that hall right now, deceiving your king, and every moment you keep me standing out here is another moment that deception continues." The two guards exchanged a glance, clearly uncertain how to handle a situation neither of them had encountered before. Before either could respond, a third voice spoke from just inside the doorway. "Let her through." Elena turned to find a woman standing in the entrance, dressed in the formal uniform of a palace advisor, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot, her expression sharp and assessing. She studied Elena for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she too could sense something unusual in the air. "Advisor Charlotte," the bearded guard said, straightening. "This woman claims to be Elena Marsh, but a guest by that name already arrived earlier this evening." "I am aware," Charlotte said, her gaze never leaving Elena's face. "And I find myself curious to understand exactly how two women can share the same identity on the same night. Come with me." Elena felt a wave of relief, so strong it nearly buckled her knees. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." Charlotte did not smile, but something in her expression softened slightly as she turned and led Elena through the entrance hall. "Do not thank me yet," she said quietly. "I have served this court for many years, and I have learned that situations like this rarely resolve simply. If you are lying to me, the consequences will be severe. But if you are telling the truth, then someone inside that ballroom has committed a grave offense against the crown, and King Draven will want to know immediately." They moved through a series of long corridors lined with portraits of past alphas and kings, the music from the ballroom growing louder with every step. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, half from fear and half from something she could not quite name, an anticipation that felt strangely like standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether she was about to fall or fly. "May I ask you something?" Elena said as they walked. Charlotte glanced at her sideways. "You may ask. Is it true what they say about the king, that he can sense a lie before it is even spoken?" Charlotte's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though her eyes remained serious. "It is true that King Draven possesses instincts far sharper than most alphas his age. Whether he has already sensed something wrong tonight, I cannot say. But if there is deception happening inside that ballroom, I suspect it will not remain hidden much longer." They reached a smaller side door near the edge of the grand ballroom, close enough that Elena could hear the swell of the orchestra and the low murmur of hundreds of voices blending together. "Once we enter, you will need to remain calm," Charlotte said. "Whatever happens next, the king will want proof, not accusations. Are you prepared for that?" Elena thought of Vivian, standing somewhere inside, wearing her name, her identity, her invitation. She thought of the years she had spent staying quiet, staying out of the way, allowing her stepsister to take whatever she wanted without protest. She thought of the strange, steady feeling that had settled into her chest the moment she read the letter 3 days ago. The sense that something important was about to happen, something that would finally require her to stop hiding. "I'm ready," Elena said. Charlotte studied her for one more moment, then nodded and pushed open the door. The ballroom stretched out before them, vast and glowing, filled with more people than Elena had ever seen gathered in one place. Chandeliers blazed overhead, their light catching on silk gowns and polished jewelry, while the orchestra's music wrapped around the room like a living thing. Elena's eyes swept across the crowd, searching desperately for any sign of her stepsister. It did not take long to find her. Near the center of the dance floor, moving through the final steps of a slow, formal dance, Vivian stood in a deep red gown, her golden hair pinned into an elegant style Elena had never seen her wear before. And there, with his hand resting at her waist, stood a tall man in a simple black coat, his dark hair cut close, his profile sharp and commanding, even from across the crowded room. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Even from this distance, she could feel something radiating from him, a kind of quiet, contained power that made the hair on her arms rise, despite the warmth of the ballroom. This had to be Alpha King Draven Cole. As if sensing her gaze, as if some invisible thread had suddenly pulled taut between them, Draven's head turned. His amber eyes swept across the crowded room, and found her standing near the side entrance, and for one long, suspended moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Elena watched something shift in his expression, confusion giving way to sharp, sudden focus. His nostrils flared slightly, as though catching a scent carried across the distance between them, a scent that did not match the woman currently standing in his arms. The music continued to play, the crowd continued to move, but Draven Cole had gone very, very still, his gaze locked on Elena's face, as though he had just found the missing piece of a puzzle he had been quietly trying to solve all night. Beside him, Vivian, still lost in the rhythm of the dance, had not yet noticed that her stepsister was standing across the ballroom, watching everything unfold. Draven's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at Vivian's waist, as the final notes of the dance faded into silence. His eyes remained fixed on the woman standing near the side entrance, a stranger in a simple pale blue dress, who carried herself with none of the practiced elegance the rest of the room displayed. And yet something about her presence pulled at him with a force he could not ignore. The scent reached him a heartbeat later, carried on the shifting air of the ballroom, faint but unmistakable. It was the same scent he had caught fleeting traces of all evening, buried beneath the borrowed perfume worn by the woman currently standing in his arms. Sweet, warm, touched with something like wildflowers after rain. It was the scent his wolf had been quietly straining toward for hours, without his conscious mind understanding why. "Miss Marsh," Draven said slowly, releasing Vivian's waist and stepping back half a pace. "Would you excuse me a moment?" Vivian's smile flickered, uncertainty creeping into her eyes for the first time all evening. "Of course, my king," she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier smoothness. Draven did not wait for further conversation. He turned and moved through the crowd, guests parting instinctively before him, murmurs rising in his wake as people noticed the sudden shift in his attention. Advisor Charlotte stood near the side entrance beside a young woman Draven had never seen before, though his instincts insisted otherwise, insisted that everything about her felt deeply, urgently familiar. "Charlotte," Draven said as he approached, his voice low. "Who is this?" Charlotte inclined her head respectfully. "My king. This woman arrived at the gates only moments ago, claiming to be Elena Marsh. She insists the guest currently on the dance floor, the woman you have been speaking with all evening, is not who she claims to be." Draven's gaze shifted to Elena, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her best efforts to remain calm. Up close, the scent was undeniable, layered beneath nervousness and the faint smell of horses and forest road, but unmistakably true, in a way the woman on the dance floor's borrowed perfume had never quite managed to be. "Your name," Draven said quietly. "Elena Marsh," Elena answered, meeting his eyes, despite the way her voice trembled slightly. "I understand how strange this must sound, my king, but I promise you, everything I am telling you is true." Draven studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes narrowing as though weighing her words against some internal measure only he could perceive. "Strange claims require strong evidence, Miss Marsh. Tell me, if you are indeed who you say you are, why would another woman arrive at my ball wearing your name?" Elena took a steadying breath. "The woman you danced with tonight is my stepsister, Vivian. The invitation arrived at our home 3 days ago addressed to me. I told her she could attend in my place, since I had never wanted any part of pack politics or mating balls. But instead of simply attending under her own name and explaining the situation honestly, she locked me in my room and traveled here pretending to be me." "A serious accusation," Draven said, though something in his tone suggested he did not find it difficult to believe. And why should I trust the word of a woman who arrived unannounced and without invitation, over the guest who has spent the entire evening in my company? Elena held his gaze, refusing to look away, despite the intimidating weight of his attention. Because you already know something is wrong, my king. I saw it in your face the moment you looked across this room. Whatever your instincts have been telling you all evening, I suspect they have been trying to tell you the same thing I am telling you now. A flicker of something crossed Draven's expression, surprise mixed with grudging respect. Few people spoke to him with such directness, especially not strangers standing uninvited at the edge of his own ballroom. You are perceptive, Miss Marsh, he said finally. Or else remarkably bold for someone in your position. Perhaps both, Elena said, and for the first time that evening, something like the faintest smile touched the corner of Draven's mouth, before quickly disappearing beneath his composed expression. He turned to Charlotte. Bring Miss Vivian Marsh to the private chamber behind the East Hall, quietly, if possible. I do not wish to create unnecessary panic among the other guests until I understand exactly what has happened here tonight. At once, my king, Charlotte said, moving swiftly back into the crowd. Draven turned back to Elena, his expression unreadable, but his eyes still carrying that same searching intensity. Come with me, Miss Marsh. If what you say is true, I intend to hear the full explanation directly from your stepsister, in your presence, before I decide how this matter will be resolved. Elena nodded, falling into step beside him as he led her away from the ballroom and down a quieter corridor, lined with tall windows, overlooking the moonlit gardens beyond. The music from the ballroom faded behind them with every step, replaced by the soft echo of their footsteps against polished stone. May I ask you something, my king? Elena said as they walked. You may. How did you know something was wrong? Before I arrived, I mean. What made you suspicious of her in the first place? Draven was quiet for a moment, considering the question. My wolf has always been sensitive to scent in ways that go beyond simple recognition. Every person carries a truth beneath whatever they choose to show the world, and that truth reveals itself in small, subtle ways. The woman I danced with tonight wore your name, and your perfume, but underneath both, there was something that did not match. A wrongness I could not immediately explain. And now? Elena asked quietly. Does it match now? Draven glanced at her, his amber eyes catching the moonlight streaming through the windows beside them. Now, he said slowly. It matches perfectly. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of them fully understood yet, but that both of them recognized as significant. Elena felt her cheeks warm despite the seriousness of the situation, and she quickly looked away, focusing instead on the corridor stretching ahead of them. They reached a set of heavy wooden doors near the east wing of the palace, where two guards stood at attention. Draven nodded, and the guards pushed the doors open, revealing a smaller chamber furnished with a long table and several high-backed chairs, clearly meant for private meetings rather than grand celebrations. Wait here, Draven said. Charlotte will bring your stepsister shortly. I would like you present when she arrives, so there can be no confusion about who is telling the truth. Elena nodded, taking a seat near the edge of the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she waited. The minutes stretched on slowly, each one filled with a growing tension that made her stomach twist into knots. She thought about what Vivian's face would look like the moment she realized her deception had finally been discovered. She thought about the years of quiet resentment that had built between them, and wondered whether tonight would finally bring some kind of resolution, or simply deepen the divide that had always existed in their strange, complicated family. Draven paced near the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful, as he glanced occasionally toward Elena. Neither of them spoke for a long while, the silence between them filled with the distant echo of music still drifting from the ballroom. Finally, the sound of raised voices reached them from the corridor outside, growing louder with every passing second. The doors swung open, and Charlotte entered, her expression grim, followed closely by Vivian, whose face had gone pale beneath her careful makeup, her earlier confidence replaced by something closer to panic. Vivian's eyes swept across the room and landed on Elena, and for a moment, something like genuine shock flickered across her features, quickly replaced by a desperate attempt to recover her composure. Elena, Vivian said, her voice tight. What are you doing here? I think, Draven said quietly, stepping forward, his amber eyes fixed on Vivian with an intensity that made her flinch. That is a question I would very much like answered as well. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint, distant sound of the orchestra, still playing somewhere far beyond these walls, unaware that the true drama of the evening had already moved far from the dance floor and into this quiet chamber, where the truth was finally about to be spoken aloud. Vivian stood frozen near the center of the room, her gloved hands twisting together in front of her deep red gown, her eyes darting between Elena's steady gaze and Draven's unreadable expression. The confidence that had carried her through the entire evening seemed to drain out of her, all at once, leaving behind something small and frightened that Elena had rarely seen in her stepsister before. "I can explain," Vivian said quickly, her voice thin. "Please do," Draven said, his tone deceptively calm, the kind of calm that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. "I am eager to understand why two women have claimed the same identity in my palace tonight." Vivian's gaze flicked toward Elena, something almost pleading in her expression, as though hoping her stepsister might step in and soften whatever was about to unfold. Elena said nothing, folding her hands quietly in her lap, waiting. "The invitation arrived for Elena," Vivian said finally, choosing her words with visible care. "But Elena has never wanted anything to do with pack politics or mating balls. She told me herself that she did not want to attend. I simply thought it would be a shame to waste such an opportunity, especially when she had no interest in it herself. So you decided to steal her identity instead of arriving under your own name and explaining the situation honestly," Draven said, his voice sharpening slightly. "I did not think it would matter," Vivian said, though even she seemed to hear how weak the excuse sounded once spoken aloud. "The invitation said Elena Marsh, but does it truly matter which daughter from our household attends, so long as someone from our family honors the invitation?" "It matters a great deal," Draven said, "because deception in my court is not simply a matter of etiquette. It is a matter of trust, and trust between packs is not something I take lightly, especially not on a night meant to determine something as significant as a mating bond." Vivian's face paled further at the word mating, and Elena watched something shift behind her stepsister's eyes, a flicker of understanding that perhaps this situation was far more serious than she had allowed herself to believe while planning her scheme back at Ashwood Packhouse. "My king," Vivian said, her voice softening into something more pleading, "I meant no disrespect to your crown. I only wished for the chance to be seen, to be considered, the way any young woman might hope to be considered at an event such as this. Surely that is not such a terrible crime." Draven studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing her words carefully, searching perhaps for some thread of honesty buried beneath the excuses. "The desire to be seen is not a crime," he said finally. "But the choice to achieve that, through deception, through stealing another person's name and identity, without her full knowledge of what such a theft might cost her, that is where the true offense lies." Vivian's eyes flicked toward Elena again, and this time, something like real fear entered her expression. "Elena agreed," she said quickly. "She gave up her place willingly. I did not force her into anything." "I agreed to let you attend under your own name," Elena said quietly, speaking for the first time since Vivian had entered the room. Every eye turned toward her, and she felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to continue, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I never agreed to have you lock me in my own bedroom for an entire day, nor did I agree to have you steal my identity papers and wear my name into a royal court as though it were nothing more than a costume you could borrow for an evening." The room fell silent. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed again, no ready excuse forming quickly enough to answer the simple, undeniable truth of what Elena had just said. Draven turned back to Vivian, his expression hardening. "Is this true? Did you lock your stepsister inside her own room against her will?" Vivian hesitated, clearly calculating whether a lie might still serve her better than the truth. But something in Draven's steady gaze seemed to strip away any illusion that deception might work a second time in this chamber. "Yes," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was afraid she might change her mind. I was afraid that if she saw how important tonight truly was, she might decide to attend after all, and everything I had planned would fall apart." "So you imprisoned her to protect your own ambitions," Draven said, his voice quiet, but carrying an edge that made even Charlotte, standing near the door, shift slightly on her feet. "I did not think of it that way," Vivian said weakly. Then perhaps you should begin thinking of it that way, Draven said, because that is precisely what happened, regardless of how you chose to justify it to yourself. Elena watched her stepsister's composure crumble further. The golden confidence that had carried her through years of family gatherings and social events finally giving way beneath the weight of consequences she had never fully considered while plotting her scheme. Despite everything, despite the years of resentment and quiet cruelty Elena had endured living in Vivian's shadow, she felt a small, unexpected pang of something like sympathy, watching her stepsister unravel in front of a room full of witnesses. What will happen to her? Elena asked quietly, turning to Draven. Draven's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Elena, though his expression remained serious. That depends a great deal on what you wish to see happen, Miss Marsh. You are the one who was wrong tonight. Your voice carries weight in how this matter is resolved. Elena hesitated, surprised by the question. She had never been asked to hold power over anyone's fate before, and the sudden weight of that responsibility settled uncomfortably over her shoulders. She glanced at Vivian, who stood watching her with wide, frightened eyes, all traces of her earlier cruelty replaced by something far more vulnerable. I do not wish to see her harmed, Elena said finally, but I also cannot pretend that what she did was harmless. She stole something from me that she had no right to take, and she did so without any regard for what it might cost me. Draven nodded slowly, as though her answer matched exactly what he had expected from her. Then here is what will happen, he said, turning back to Vivian. You will be escorted from this palace tonight, and you will not be permitted to attend any future gathering, hosted by the Crimson Moon Pack. Your family will be informed of the reason for this banishment, and it will be recorded formally in the Pack archives, so that no future deception of this kind can be so easily attempted again. Vivian's face crumpled, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, though whether from genuine remorse or simple humiliation, Elena could not say for certain. Please, Vivian whispered. My king, please reconsider. This will ruin my reputation entirely. Perhaps, Draven said, his voice softening only slightly. You should have considered your reputation before choosing to build tonight's plan upon a foundation of theft and imprisonment. Charlotte stepped forward, placing a firm but not unkind hand on Vivian's shoulder. Come, she said quietly, the carriage is waiting. Vivian cast one final look toward Elena, her expression a tangled mixture of anger, humiliation, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine regret. This is not over, she said quietly, her voice trembling. You may have won tonight, Elena, but you have made an enemy you will regret making. Elena said nothing, watching silently as Charlotte led her stepsister from the room, the heavy wooden doors closing behind them with a sound that echoed through the sudden stillness of the chamber. The distant music from the ballroom continued to drift faintly through the walls, unaware that an entire storm had just passed through this small room and out into the night. Draven turned to Elena once the doors had fully closed, his expression unreadable for a long moment, before softening into something gentler than Elena had yet seen from him. I am sorry, he said quietly, for the ordeal you have endured tonight, and for whatever ordeal came before it, living beneath your stepsister's shadow. Elena felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected emotion rising after the tension of the past several minutes finally beginning to release. Thank you, my king, she said softly, for believing me when you had every reason to believe otherwise. Your scent, Draven said simply, has never once wavered from the truth, not from the moment you walked through that door. That is a rare thing, Miss Marsh, rarer than you likely realize. Elena met his gaze, something warm and uncertain unfolding in her chest under the weight of his attention, and for the first time since the invitation had first arrived 3 days ago, she found herself wondering whether tonight might hold far more significance for her future than she had ever imagined possible. The ballroom had grown quieter by the time Draven led Elena back through the tall doors, though the orchestra still played, and most of the guests remained unaware that anything unusual had occurred behind the closed doors of the East Chamber. Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her as she entered beside the king, whispers rippling outward through the crowd like ripples across still water. Who is that? Isn't that the woman who danced with the king earlier? No, look closer, that isn't the same dress at all. Elena kept her chin lifted, though her cheeks warmed under the weight of so much sudden attention. She had spent her entire life avoiding notice, slipping quietly through crowded rooms without drawing a single glance, and now, Standing beside Alpha King Draven Cole in the center of the grandest ballroom she had ever seen, she felt as though every hidden corner of herself had been suddenly illuminated for the world to examine. Draven seemed to sense her discomfort, for he leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You need not explain anything to anyone tonight, Miss Marsh. Whatever questions arise, I will address them myself, in my own time." "Thank you," Elena murmured, grateful for the small reassurance, though she suspected the whispers would follow her regardless of what explanation Draven eventually offered. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, near tall windows that looked out over the moonlit gardens, away from the thickest part of the crowd. A server approached with a tray of refreshments, and Draven took 2 glasses of pale gold wine, offering one to Elena. "To surviving a night far stranger than either of us anticipated," he said, a faint hint of dry humor touching his voice for the first time since Elena had met him. Elena allowed herself a small, tired laugh, accepting the glass. "I believe you may have anticipated it more than I did, my king. You seemed to sense something was wrong long before I ever arrived." Sensing that something is wrong, and understanding exactly what it means, are 2 very different things, Draven admitted. "I spent most of the evening assuming I had simply misjudged something about the woman I was speaking with. It was not until you walked through that door that the truth became clear." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dancers move gracefully across the polished floor, the music swirling around them like a living current. Elena found herself studying Draven's profile in the golden chandelier light, the sharp line of his jaw, the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him even while standing still. "May I ask you something, my king?" she said finally. "You may. Why did this ball matter so much? I have heard stories, of course, about mating balls and pack politics, but I confess I never understood why an event like this would carry such weight, especially for someone in your position." Draven was quiet for a moment, turning his glass slowly in his hand as he considered his answer. "For most alphas, choosing a mate is simply a matter of personal preference, a private decision made without much scrutiny from the wider pack community. But for someone in my position, ruling over the Crimson Moon Pack and holding influence over several allied territories, a mating bond carries political weight as well as personal meaning. The pack elders have pressed me for years to choose a mate, believing it would stabilize alliances and reassure the smaller packs who look to Crimson Moon for protection." "And have you found that pressure difficult to bear?" Elena asked. Something shifted behind Draven's amber eyes, a flicker of weariness that he quickly smoothed away. "More difficult than most people realize," he admitted. "I have attended countless gatherings over the past several years, meeting daughters of noble families, each one presented to me as a potential match, each one polished and prepared to say exactly what she believed I wished to hear. My wolf has never once responded to any of them, the way instinct is supposed to respond to a true mate." Elena felt her pulse quicken slightly at the direction of the conversation, uncertain what to make of the quiet intensity building in Draven's voice. "And tonight?" she asked carefully. Draven turned to look at her fully, his gaze steady and searching. "Tonight," he said slowly, "was the first time in 5 years that my wolf responded to anyone at all." The words settled over Elena like a weight she had not been prepared to carry, warm and unsettling all at once. She opened her mouth to respond, though she was not entirely certain what she intended to say, when a voice interrupted them from nearby. "My king," a man said, approaching with a respectful bow. He was tall and lean, dressed in formal attire, similar to Draven's own, with sharp features and dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead. "Forgive the interruption, but the council members are asking after you. They wish to discuss the events of this evening before the night concludes." Draven's expression tightened slightly, though he nodded. "Thank you, Nathan. I will join them shortly." The man called Nathan glanced curiously toward Elena, his gaze assessing but not unkind. "And this must be the young woman the entire ballroom has been whispering about," he said, a faint smile touching his mouth. "I am Nathan Cole, the king's younger brother. It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Marsh, especially under such unusual circumstances." "The pleasure is mine," Elena said, offering a small, polite smile despite the exhaustion beginning to settle into her bones after the long and eventful evening. Nathan's eyes flicked briefly toward his brother, something unspoken passing between them, before he inclined his head and turned back toward the crowd, disappearing into the sea of guests to relay Draven's response to the waiting council. The council, Draven said, sighing slightly as he watched his brother go. We'll want a full account of what transpired tonight. They take matters of deception within the court very seriously, particularly when they involve a mating ball. Will they cause trouble for you? Elena asked, concern creeping into her voice, despite the brief acquaintance she and Draven shared. They may express displeasure, Draven admitted, but the fault lies entirely with your stepsister's actions, not with anything you or I have done. I do not intend to allow their concerns to overshadow what actually matters here tonight. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for the meaning behind his words, and what matters here tonight, in your view. Draven's gaze softened, something warm and unguarded flickering behind his amber eyes for just a moment, before he composed himself once more. That, Miss Marsh, is a conversation I believe deserves more privacy than a crowded ballroom can offer. Will you permit me to speak with you further, once the council has been addressed, and the evening has settled into something quieter? Elena felt her heart quicken at the request, a mixture of nervousness and something far more hopeful stirring in her chest. I would like that very much, my king. Draven inclined his head, a faint smile touching his mouth, before he turned to make his way toward the council chamber, leaving Elena standing near the tall windows, watching the dancers continue their graceful movements across the ballroom floor, her mind spinning with everything that had happened in the span of just a few short hours. Outside, beyond the golden glow of Ashgate Hall, a carriage rattled quickly down the dark forest road, carrying Vivian away from the palace and back toward Ashwood Packhouse, her tears long since dried into something harder and colder, her mind already turning over plans for how she might yet reclaim what she believed she had been unfairly denied. The council chamber sat at the top of a narrow staircase near the rear of Ashgate Hall, a circular room lined with tall bookshelves and lit by a single large fireplace that crackled softly against the cool night air. 7 council members sat around a long curved table, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to open displeasure as Draven entered and took his seat at the head of the room. My king, said the eldest council member, a silver-haired woman named Margaret, whose family had served the Crimson Moon Pack for 3 generations. We understand there has been an incident tonight involving a case of stolen identity. There has, Draven confirmed, folding his hands calmly on the table before him. A guest arrived under false pretenses, claiming to be someone she was not, and locked the true invited guest away in order to carry out her deception. Murmurs rippled around the table. A younger council member, a sharp-faced man named Edward, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. This is a serious breach of trust, my king. Mating balls exist precisely so that alliances can be formed with confidence and transparency. If deception of this kind is allowed to pass without significant consequence, it sets a dangerous precedent for future gatherings. I agree entirely, Draven said, which is why I have already banished the guilty party from any future Crimson Moon gathering, and formally recorded the offense in the Pack archives. Her family will be informed of the consequences of her actions. Margaret studied Draven carefully, her sharp eyes missing little. And the true invited guest, the one who was wronged tonight? What has become of her? She remains here at the ball, Draven said. I intend to speak with her further once this council session concludes. A ripple of interest passed through the room at this admission, several council members exchanging glances that suggested they understood the implication behind Draven's simple statement more clearly than he perhaps intended to reveal. My king, Edward said carefully, forgive my boldness, but is there something more we should understand about your interest in this particular guest? Draven considered his answer for a long moment before speaking. My wolf has responded to her presence in a manner it has not responded to anyone in the past 5 years, he said finally. I do not yet know what that means for the future, but I believe it is significant enough to warrant careful attention, rather than dismissal. The chamber fell into a thoughtful silence. Margaret's expression shifted into something gentler, almost hopeful. We have long hoped, my king, that you would find someone whose bond felt true, rather than politically convenient. If this young woman is indeed the one your instincts have recognized, then perhaps tonight's unfortunate deception has led, quite unexpectedly, to a fortunate discovery. That remains to be seen, Draven said carefully, though something in his tone suggested he privately agreed with Margaret's assessment. For now, I ask only that the council allow me the space to pursue this matter with the same care I would give any decision of such importance. The council members exchanged glances around the table, and slowly, one by one, they nodded their agreement, though Edward's expression remained cautious. "We will trust your judgment, my king," he said finally, "but we ask that you keep us informed as matters develop. The stability of our alliances depends a great deal on decisions such as this one." "Understood," Draven said, rising from his seat. "Thank you for your patience tonight. I know this incident has disrupted what should have been a straightforward celebration." As the council members began to disperse, murmuring quietly among themselves, Margaret approached Draven near the door, her expression softening into something almost maternal. "My king," she said quietly, "I have watched you carry the weight of this crown since you were far too young to bear such responsibility alone. I hope, whatever comes of tonight's discovery, that you allow yourself the chance to choose something for your own happiness, rather than simply for the sake of the pack's stability." Draven met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering briefly behind his composed expression. "Thank you, Margaret. I will keep your words in mind." He left the council chamber and made his way back down the narrow staircase, his thoughts already turning toward the quiet corner of the ballroom, where he had left Elena standing among the tall windows. The evening had taken turns he never could have anticipated when he first descended the grand staircase hours earlier, expecting nothing more than another tedious round of polite conversation with hopeful noble daughters. Instead, he found himself walking back toward a woman whose scent alone had stirred something in him that 5 years of careful searching had failed to produce. He found Elena exactly where he had left her, though she had moved slightly closer to the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the garden fountain outside. She turned as he approached, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "How did the council receive the news?" she asked. "Better than I expected," Draven admitted, "though they will certainly want updates as matters progress." "Progress toward what, exactly?" Elena asked, a hint of nervous curiosity coloring her voice. Draven studied her for a long moment before answering, his amber eyes soft in the dim golden light of the ballroom. "Toward understanding, I suppose, whatever it is that has drawn my wolf so powerfully toward you tonight." Elena's cheeks warmed, though she did not look away. "I confess, I do not fully understand it myself, my king. I came here tonight only intending to stop my stepsister's deception. I never imagined the evening would end with such a conversation." "Life rarely unfolds the way we imagine it will," Draven said quietly. "Sometimes the most important discoveries arrive wrapped in circumstances we never would have chosen for ourselves." They stood together near the window for a long while, the ballroom slowly emptying around them as the hour grew late, and guests began departing in small, murmuring clusters. Neither of them spoke much, content instead to simply share the quiet companionship of the moment, though Elena could feel something building steadily between them, a warmth she had never experienced with anyone before, unfamiliar and yet somehow entirely welcome. "It grows late," Draven said finally, as the last of the orchestra's musicians began packing away their instruments. "Allow me to arrange proper lodging for you here at the palace tonight, rather than sending you back along the forest roads so late in the evening." Elena hesitated, thinking of Grace and Oliver waiting anxiously back at Ashwood Packhouse, wondering what had become of her. "I appreciate the offer, my king, but I have people waiting for word of my safety. Then I will send a rider ahead immediately, to inform them you are safe, and will return in the morning," Draven said. "I would feel far more at ease, knowing you were resting safely within these walls tonight, rather than traveling dark roads at such a late hour." Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of ulterior motive behind the offer, but found only genuine concern reflected in his amber eyes. "Thank you," she said finally. "I accept." Draven smiled, small and genuine, an expression that transformed his usually composed features into something warmer and far more human. "Then allow me to show you to a proper room, Miss Marsh. Tomorrow, I believe, we have a great deal more to discuss." As they walked together through the quieting halls of Ashgate Hall, Elena felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, despite the chaos and uncertainty of the evening behind her. Whatever tomorrow held, whatever conversations and decisions still waited to unfold, she found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely curious and hopeful about what the future might bring. Morning light spilled gently through tall curtained windows, waking Elena from a sleep deeper and more peaceful than she had experienced in years. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the bed beneath her, and the quiet grandeur of the room surrounding her, before the memories of the previous night came flooding back all at once. She rose and dressed in the simple clothes a palace attendant had left for her, a soft green dress far finer than anything she owned back at Ashwood Pack House. A gentle knock sounded at her door moments later, and she opened it to find Grace standing in the hallway, relief flooding her face the instant she saw Elena safe and well. "Elena," Grace said, pulling her into a quick embrace. "I have been worried sick since Oliver returned last night without you." When the rider arrived from the palace explaining what happened, I could hardly believe it. "It has been an extraordinary night," Elena admitted, stepping back to study her friend's tired face. "Thank you, Grace, for everything you did to help me. I do not know what would have happened if you had not unlocked that door." Grace waved off the thanks with a small, embarrassed smile. "Never mind that now. Tell me everything. Is it true? Did the king truly banish Vivian from the palace?" Elena nodded, sitting down on the edge of the bed as she recounted the events of the previous evening, from the confrontation in the private chamber to the quiet conversation she had shared with Draven near the ballroom windows. Grace listened with wide, astonished eyes, occasionally pressing a hand to her chest as the story unfolded. "And now?" Grace asked once Elena had finished. "What happens next?" "I am not entirely certain," Elena admitted. "The king asked to speak with me further this morning. I suppose I will find out soon enough." As if summoned by her words, another knock sounded at the door, this time from a palace attendant, informing Elena that breakfast awaited her in a private dining room, and that King Draven hoped she would join him once she felt ready. Elena's heart quickened at the message, and she smoothed her dress nervously before following the attendant through the quiet morning corridors of Ashgate Hall, Grace trailing along at a respectful distance behind her. She found Draven seated at a small round table near a wide window overlooking the palace gardens, sunlight streaming across the pale linen tablecloth and the modest spread of breakfast foods arranged between them. He rose as she entered, offering a warm, genuine smile that eased some of the nervous tension in her chest. "Miss Marsh," he said, "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in quite some time," Elena admitted, taking the seat he offered across from his own. "Thank you again for your hospitality." They ate quietly for a few minutes, the conversation easy and unhurried, touching on simple topics like the palace gardens and the mild autumn weather, before Draven set down his cup and studied her with a more serious expression. "I have given a great deal of thought to what I would like to say to you this morning," he began, "though I confess I have rarely found myself at a loss for words quite like this before." Elena set down her own cup, giving him her full attention. "Please, speak freely, my king." Draven took a slow breath, his amber eyes steady on hers. "As I mentioned last night, my wolf has not responded to anyone in the past 5 years, the way it responded to you. I have attended countless gatherings, met daughters from every noble family within our alliance, and felt nothing beyond polite indifference toward any of them. Last night, from the moment I caught even the faintest trace of your true scent beneath your stepsister's deception, something in me recognized you before I ever laid eyes on your face." Elena felt her pulse quicken, warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "I confess I felt something as well," she admitted quietly, though I could not begin to explain it at the time. Standing across that ballroom, the moment our eyes met, everything else seemed to fade away. Draven's expression softened further, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering behind his usually composed features. "I do not wish to rush you into a decision you are not prepared to make," he said carefully. "I understand that a single evening, however significant, is not sufficient grounds for a lifelong bond, but I would like the opportunity to know you properly, Elena, beyond the chaos of last night's events, so that whatever decision eventually comes, it comes from genuine understanding, rather than mere instinct alone." Elena studied his face, moved by the careful sincerity in his words, so different from the calculating ambition she had grown accustomed to witnessing in her stepsister's pursuit of status and power. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Though I confess, this is all quite overwhelming. Only days ago, I was scrubbing pots in my family's kitchen, entirely invisible to the world around me. Now I find myself sitting across from an alpha king, discussing the possibility of a lifelong bond." Draven's mouth curved into a small, warm smile. "Perhaps that is precisely why my wolf recognized you so clearly," he said. "You have spent your life without pretense, without the careful performances so many others rely upon to navigate positions of power. There is a rare honesty in you, Elena, one I have not encountered in a very long time. They spent the rest of the morning walking slowly through the palace gardens, talking easily about their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. Elena learned that Draven had lost his father 5 years earlier, thrust into leadership far sooner than he had ever anticipated, carrying the weight of an entire pack's stability on shoulders he sometimes felt were not yet strong enough for the burden. Draven learned that Elena had lost her own mother years ago, leaving her to navigate a household that had never fully accepted her as anything more than an obligation to be tolerated, rather than a daughter to be cherished. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward late afternoon, something had settled comfortably between them, a quiet understanding that neither needed to rush toward conclusions, neither of them yet fully understood. Draven arranged for Elena to stay at the palace for several more days, allowing them the chance to continue their conversations away from the pressures of Ashwood Packhouse and the lingering unease of her stepsister's recent betrayal. But even as Elena settled into the unexpected comfort of her new surroundings, a message arrived that evening, carried by an anxious-looking messenger, delivered directly to Draven's private study. Elena watched his expression darken as he read the letter, his jaw tightening with a tension she had not seen since the confrontation in the East Chamber the previous night. "What is it?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. Draven folded the letter slowly, his amber eyes hardening. "It seems," he said quietly, "that your stepsister has not accepted her banishment as quietly as I had hoped." Elena's stomach tightened as she watched Draven set the letter down on his desk, his expression carefully controlled, despite the tension radiating from his broad shoulders. "What does it say?" she asked, moving closer to stand beside him. "Your stepsister has appealed to a neighboring pack," Draven said, his voice low and measured. "The Thornwood pack, allies of ours in name, though their loyalty has always been more transactional than genuine. She has apparently convinced their alpha, a man named Adrian Wren, that her banishment was unjust, and that Crimson Moon has wrongfully favored an outsider over a daughter of proper noble standing." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the study fire. "Can she truly do that? Appeal to another pack against your decision?" "Technically, yes," Draven admitted. "Pack alliances are built on delicate agreements, and any perceived injustice can be used as leverage by those seeking to weaken those bonds. Adrian Wren has never been entirely content with his position beneath Crimson Moon's influence. This may simply be the opportunity he has been waiting for, to stir discontent among our allies." "What will he do?" Elena asked. Draven's jaw tightened. "The letter states that Alpha Wren intends to formally request an audience, demanding I reconsider Vivian's banishment and issue a public apology for what he calls an unjust accusation against a noble daughter. He frames the entire situation as an insult not just to Vivian, but to the honor of every family within our alliance who might one day find themselves subject to similar accusations." Elena felt her chest tighten, with a fresh wave of anxiety. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "If I had never come forward, none of this would have happened." Draven turned to her immediately, his expression softening as he reached out to gently take her hand. "This is not your fault, Elena. Your stepsister created this entire situation through her own choices. The consequences she now faces are the direct result of her actions, not yours. I will not allow her manipulation of a rival pack to change the truth of what happened here." "But if this threatens the stability of your alliances," Elena said, "surely it would be easier to simply undo the banishment and put this matter to rest." "Easier, perhaps," Draven said, "but not right. I built my reputation on the principle that truth matters more than convenience. If I reverse my decision now, simply to appease a rival alpha's manufactured outrage, I will have proven that deception can be rewarded, so long as the deceiver finds the right ally to defend her cause. That is a precedent I refuse to set." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, admiration mixing with the anxiety still churning in her stomach. "What will you do then?" Draven considered the question carefully. "I will grant Alpha Wren his audience, as diplomacy requires, but I will also invite witnesses from that night, including advisor Charlotte, to confirm the full account of what transpired. If Wren wishes to challenge the truth, he will need to do so in front of evidence he cannot easily dismiss." 3 days later, the audience took place in the same council chamber, where Draven had first addressed his own advisors following the ball. Alpha Adrian Wren arrived with an entourage of 6 guards and a confident, almost arrogant posture, clearly expecting his demands to carry significant weight against a young king still finding his footing in matters of pack politics. "King Draven," Wren said, his voice smooth and calculating as he took his seat across the council table. "I appreciate you granting this audience so promptly. I trust we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding quickly and restore proper harmony between our packs." "I am happy to discuss the matter thoroughly," Draven said calmly, "though I would not describe what occurred as a misunderstanding. Advisor Charlotte, would you please share your account of that evening?" Charlotte stepped forward, her expression composed and professional as she recounted the events in clear, measured detail, from Elena's arrival at the gates to the confrontation in the private chamber, where Vivian herself had admitted to locking Elena inside her own bedroom. Wren's confident expression flickered slightly as Charlotte finished her account, though he quickly recovered his composure. "A servant's account, however detailed, is hardly conclusive proof," he said dismissively. "Miss Vivian Marsh maintains that her stepsister willingly agreed to the arrangement, and that any confinement was simply a misunderstanding regarding timing, not a deliberate act of imprisonment. Miss Marsh herself is present, if you would care to hear her account directly," Draven said, gesturing toward Elena, who stood near the edge of the room, her heart pounding as every eye in the chamber turned toward her. Elena stepped forward, steadying her breathing, before speaking clearly and calmly. "I agreed only to allow my stepsister to attend the ball under her own name," she said. "I never agreed to be locked inside my bedroom for an entire day, nor did I agree to have my identity stolen and used to deceive an entire royal court. Whatever misunderstanding Alpha Wren believes occurred, I assure you, there was no misunderstanding regarding the door that was locked from the outside, preventing me from leaving my own room." Wren studied her for a long moment, clearly searching for some weakness in her testimony, but finding none. Elena held his gaze steadily, refusing to let the intimidating weight of the room shake her resolve. "Furthermore," Draven added, "I would remind Alpha Wren that deception within a mating ball carries serious consequences under long-standing pack law, consequences that exist precisely to protect the integrity of bonds formed between alphas and their chosen mates. Miss Vivian Marsh violated that trust deliberately, and with clear premeditation, evidenced by the false identification papers she prepared in advance of the event." A murmur rippled through the small gathering of witnesses seated along the chamber walls. Wren's expression tightened, clearly recognizing that his position had grown far weaker than he had anticipated upon arriving. "I see," Wren said finally, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. "Perhaps I was given an incomplete account of the situation by Miss Marsh." "Perhaps," Draven agreed, his tone carrying a quiet edge of warning. "I would encourage you, Alpha Wren, to verify claims more thoroughly before allowing them to influence relations between our packs in the future. Crimson Moon values its alliances greatly, but it values truth even more." Wren rose from his seat, offering a stiff, formal bow. "Understood, King Draven. I apologize for any inconvenience this audience may have caused. I will inform Miss Marsh that her appeal has been unsuccessful." As Wren and his entourage departed the chamber, Elena released a long breath she had not realized she was holding, relief flooding through her exhausted body. Draven crossed the room to stand beside her, his expression warm with quiet pride. "You handled that beautifully," he said softly. "I was terrified," Elena admitted, a shaky laugh escaping her. "You did not show it," Draven said, "not once." Elena looked up at him, something steady and warm settling between them despite the tension of the past several days. "What happens now?" she asked. Draven's amber eyes softened, something deeper than simple relief flickering behind his gaze. "Now," he said quietly, "I believe it is time we discuss the future properly, without the shadow of your stepsister's schemes hanging over every conversation." Elena felt her heart quicken at the promise carried in his words, sensing that whatever challenges still remained ahead, she and Draven had already weathered the storm that mattered most, and had emerged from it standing steadily together. 3 weeks passed following the audience with Alpha Wren, weeks filled with quiet mornings walking the palace gardens, long conversations shared over evening meals, and the slow, steady building of something neither Elena nor Draven had expected to find so soon after the chaos of the ball. Elena had returned briefly to Ashwood Packhouse to gather her belongings, and say a proper farewell to Grace and Oliver, both of whom had wept with joy upon hearing how completely her circumstances had changed. Her father, upon learning the full truth of what Vivian had done, had been horrified, offering apologies that Elena accepted with quiet grace, though she made clear that her future now belonged to Ashgate Hall and the life waiting for her there, not to the household that had spent so many years overlooking her presence. Vivian herself had not been present during Elena's visit, having retreated to a distant relative's estate following her failed appeal through Alpha Wren, her reputation among the noble families considerably diminished by the widely circulated account of her deception. Elena did not know what the future held for her stepsister, and though a small part of her still felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman who had once shared her home, she found she no longer carried the weight of guilt or obligation that had once bound her so tightly to Vivian's approval. She had built something entirely her own now, something true, and she refused to let old shadows dim the brightness of what waited ahead. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived clear and golden, the kind of autumn day that seemed painted rather than simply lived. Elena stood in a private chamber near the grand hall, dressed in a gown of pale ivory silk, embroidered with delicate silver thread, her hair woven with small white flowers that Grace had carefully arranged that very morning, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes as she worked. "You look radiant," Grace said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "I still can hardly believe how much has changed since that morning Vivian pounded on your door." Elena smiled softly, studying her own reflection in the tall mirror before her. She hardly recognized the woman staring back, though she understood now that the change was not simply in her appearance, but in the quiet confidence that had settled into her posture, her expression, the steady light behind her eyes. "Neither can I," Elena admitted. "Though I suppose that is often how the most important changes arrive, quietly, wrapped in circumstances we never would have chosen for ourselves." A soft knock sounded at the door, and Charlotte entered, her usually composed expression softened by something warm and genuine. "It is time, Miss Marsh," she said. "The king awaits you." Elena took a steadying breath and followed Charlotte through the quiet corridors toward the grand hall, where the entire Crimson Moon Court had gathered, along with representatives from allied pacts throughout the Northern Territory. The doors opened before her, revealing a sea of faces turned expectantly toward the entrance, sunlight streaming through tall stained glass windows that scattered colored light across the polished marble floor. At the far end of the hall, standing before the pack elders and council members, Draven waited, dressed in formal deep blue and silver, his amber eyes finding Elena's the moment she stepped through the doors. Something warm and steady passed between them across the length of the hall, and Elena felt every trace of nervousness dissolve beneath the quiet certainty reflected in his gaze. She walked slowly down the long aisle, past familiar faces, Grace and Oliver seated near the front, Margaret from the council offering a warm, encouraging smile, Nathan standing near his brother with visible pride etched across his features. When she finally reached Draven's side, he took her hands gently in his own, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. 5 years ago, I lost my father, and with him, the belief that I might one day find a bond built on something more than duty and expectation, Draven said. I attended countless gatherings, met countless hopeful matches, and felt nothing beyond the quiet ache of continued disappointment. Then, on a night that began with deception and chaos, I found something my wolf recognized before my mind ever caught up to understand it. Elena Marsh, you arrived in my life, uninvited by circumstance, and yet more truly welcomed than anyone I have ever known. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened, the weight of years spent feeling invisible, finally giving way to something entirely new. I spent my whole life believing I did not matter enough to be seen, she said softly, her voice carrying steadily across the quiet hall. You saw me the moment I walked through that door, not because of a name or a title, but because of something true beneath everything else. I am endlessly grateful that your instincts recognized what I had never dared to hope anyone might find in me. The elder presiding over the ceremony stepped forward, speaking the traditional words that bound their futures together beneath the ancient laws of their kind, words that spoke of loyalty, truth, and the rare gift of a bond, built on genuine recognition rather than convenient arrangement. As the final words were spoken, a soft murmur of warmth swept through the gathered crowd, followed by applause that rose steadily into joyful celebration. Draven leaned close, his voice soft enough that only Elena could hear. "Welcome home," he murmured. "I already feel as though I have been home for weeks," Elena admitted, a small, happy laugh escaping her. The celebration that followed lasted long into the evening, filled with music, laughter, and the warm glow of a court, finally settled into genuine happiness, rather than anxious political calculation. Elena danced with Draven beneath the same chandeliers that had witnessed her stepsister's deception weeks earlier, though tonight carried none of that earlier tension, only the quiet, steady joy of two people who had found something true in the midst of chaos neither had anticipated. Later, as the night grew quiet and most of the guests had retired, Elena and Draven stood together near the same tall windows where they had first spoken honestly weeks before, watching moonlight ripple gently across the garden fountain below. "Do you think Vivian will ever accept what happened?" Elena asked quietly, unable to fully release the small thread of concern that still lingered from her stepsister's parting words. Draven considered the question carefully before answering. "Perhaps, in time," he said. "Or perhaps she will carry her resentment for years to come. Either way, I do not believe her choices should shadow the happiness we have built together. Whatever comes in the future, we will face it together, as we faced Alpha Ren's challenge, with truth on our side and trust between us." Elena leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence settle over her like the quiet certainty of coming home after years of wandering lost. "Then I suppose," she said softly, "I am no longer afraid of whatever the future might bring." Outside, beyond the palace walls, the northern territory settled into peaceful nighttime quiet, unaware that within Ashgate Hall, a queen had finally been crowned not through political convenience or careful performance, but through the simple, undeniable truth that no borrowed name or stolen scent could ever hope to hide. And though shadows of old resentment still lingered somewhere far beyond the palace gates, waiting perhaps for another day to stir trouble once again, tonight belonged entirely to the quiet, steady triumph of truth, finally recognized and rightfully rewarded.